They thought she was just another woman walking her dog on a back road nobody used anymore. That was their first mistake. The road cut through the outskirts of Harlan County, Kentucky, a two-lane strip of cracked asphalt that wound between old coal country and thick Appalachian woods. In October, those woods turned rust and amber, and the hills went quiet in a way that felt almost sacred. Almost. Leah Sutton had grown up 20 miles east of here, in a town where everyone knew your name and half of them owed your daddy money. She hadn't been back in years. She didn't come back for the scenery. She came back because Ranger needed the space. Ranger was a Belgian Malinois, 4 years old, 73 pounds of coiled muscle and absolute loyalty. He moved beside her not like a pet, but like a partner. Close aware, his amber eyes scanning the tree line in small, practiced sweeps. There was a scar along his left flank, a pale ridge of tissue, about 4 inches long, where a piece of shrapnel had caught him outside Kandahar 18 months ago. He didn't limp. He never limped. But some mornings, when the temperature dropped, Leah would watch him stand up from his cot and take one careful breath before he moved, and she understood that breath completely because she took the same one. She wore old jeans, trail runners, a grey pullover with a faded Fort Bragg logo she'd had since 2019. No holster visible, no badge. Her dark hair was back in a knot, and she had the kind of face people called unreadable, not cold, just still, like a room where everything was in its right place and nobody had disturbed it yet. The leash in her hand was more ritual than restraint. Ranger didn't need it. They'd been walking 40 minutes when she heard the truck. It came slow, the engine throaty and uneven, gravel crunching under wide tires. A black Dodge Ram, maybe 2015, one headlight slightly dimmer than the other. It eased up from behind her and then slid alongside, keeping pace. The window was already down. There were 3 of them. The driver was a thick-necked man in his 40s with a beard going grey at the edges and a mossy oak cap pulled low. He had the kind of sunburn that never quite faded, and his left elbow rested on the door like he'd been parked there his whole life. Behind him, in the back seat, sat a younger man, mid-20s, restless, picking at the label on a water bottle with his thumbnail, and in the passenger seat, half-turned already to look at her, was the one who decided to speak. Hey, just that. One syllable, carrying everything that was wrong about the situation. Leah kept walking. Ranger kept scanning. Hey, I'm talking to you. She glanced over once. Not afraid, not interested. The kind of glance you give a car alarm going off down the street. Then she looked forward again. The truck rolled with her. Nice dog, the passenger said. He was lean, maybe 30, with a tattoo crawling up the side of his neck that she clocked in half a second. A number, a name, something she filed away without meaning to. Old habit. What kind is that? Belgian Malinois, she said, flat, informational. The way you'd answer a stranger asking the time. Military dog? The driver leaned across the passenger now, squinting at Ranger. Looks like one of those military dogs. He is, she said. There was a beat of silence. The truck slowed slightly, matching her pace with something that was starting to feel less like curiosity and more like a decision being made. You alone out here? The passenger asked. She stopped walking, not because she was scared. She stopped because she'd been trained. Years of it, drilled into muscle memory in places these men would never see. To recognize the moment a situation shifted from uncomfortable to something else. And this was that moment. The truck stopped too. Ranger sat. He didn't bark, he didn't growl. He simply sat and oriented toward the truck with the focused stillness of an animal that had been in worse situations than this and knew exactly what it meant. I'm going to ask you to keep moving, Leah said. Her voice was the same temperature it had been the whole conversation. Not hostile, not pleading, just clear. The passenger opened his door. He climbed out unhurried, like he had all the time in the world, and stood in the road with his thumbs hooked in his belt loops. Behind him, the back door opened too. The younger one stepped out, and she could see now that he was holding something. A length of chain wrapped once around his fist. The driver stayed in the truck, watching. "We're just being friendly," the passenger said, and he smiled, and the smile was the worst thing about him because there was nothing behind it. No reason to be rude. "I'm not being rude," Leah said. "I'm being clear. There's a difference. That a trained attack dog." The younger one was looking at Ranger now with the specific interest of someone calculating risk and getting the math wrong. "Because those things are worth money. People pay serious money for trained military dogs." Ranger's ears moved, just slightly, forward. Leah felt something change in her chest. Not fear, not even anger exactly. It was something older than both of those things. Something that lived just below the sternum, behind the ribs, in the part of her that had spent 3 years as a Special Forces canine handler and 2 combat deployments, learning what it meant to be responsible for another living thing in a world that was actively trying to end you both. Threatening Ranger wasn't the same as threatening her. It was worse. "Last chance," she said. The passenger laughed. It was a short, dismissive sound. The laugh of a man who had never once in his life been wrong about who held the power in a situation. "Last chance for what, sweetheart?" The chain swung once, experimentally, in the younger man's fist. Leah unclipped the leash. There are moments in a confrontation where time doesn't slow down the way people describe in movies. It doesn't stretch out into something golden and cinematic. It compresses. Everything becomes dense and close and immediate, and the body does what it knows, and the mind is 3 steps ahead already, and the whole thing is over before anyone who wasn't trained for it could have understood what they were watching. Ranger moved first, not because he was commanded to, but because he knew. 4 years of working together had created something between them that operated below language, in the space where trust and training overlapped. He went low and fast toward the younger man, who swung the chain and missed because he'd anticipated a dog, and Ranger didn't move like what most people pictured when they thought of a dog. He moved like a calculation. Leah moved toward the passenger. He was bigger than her, broader, and he had the confidence of someone who had spent his life resolving physical situations in his favor. He reached for her arm with the practiced ease of a man who had grabbed women before. She let him take her wrist, let him feel like he had it, let him begin to pull, and then she wasn't where he expected her to be, and his own momentum became a problem he didn't know how to solve, and his face met the hood of his own truck with a sound like a cabinet door slamming. He didn't go down immediately. They never did, the ones who were sure of themselves. He pushed off the hood, dazed and furious, and swung wide, and she moved inside the swing and hit him twice. The second time in the solar plexus, where the body keeps all its certainty, and then he was on his knees on the gravel and the world had rearranged itself around him in a way he hadn't agreed to. Behind her, the chain hit the ground. The younger one had made the mistake of assuming Ranger would bite and release. He hadn't understood that Ranger's job wasn't to hurt. It was to control. The young man was on his back in the gravel, Ranger's weight across his chest, his wrist held in a grip that would have broken if he'd fought it. He wasn't fighting it. He was saying something high and urgent that might have been a prayer. The driver's door opened. Leah turned. The man in the mossy oak cap stepped out slowly, both hands visible, and looked at what had happened to his associates in approximately 4 seconds, and something moved across his face. Not guilt, not remorse, but the specific recalibration of a man who has encountered a force he fundamentally misread. "Call it off," he said, nodding at Ranger. His voice had gone off. "Aus," Leah said quietly. Ranger released the young man's wrist, stepped back and sat, crisp as a military salute. The driver looked at her for a long moment. She could see him trying to place her, the way people did when they knew they were missing something important. She didn't help him. "Who are you?" he said. She bent down and picked up the leash. She clipped it back onto Ranger's collar with the same unhurried movement she used every morning. "Someone who just wanted to walk her dog," she said. She left them there, the passenger still on his knees working out how to breathe. the younger one sitting up in the gravel, cradling his wrist against his chest, the driver standing by his truck with both hands still visible, and an expression she'd seen before on men who had reached the end of a certainty they'd carried their whole lives and found nothing on the other side of it. She didn't look back. She walked for another quarter-mile, Ranger at her heel, before she let herself exhale slowly through her nose. Her hands were steady. They'd been steady the whole time. She'd worked very hard to get them that way, through things she didn't talk about at dinner tables and places she didn't name in casual conversation, and she was not ashamed of that steadiness. She was grateful for it. What she was not grateful for was the truck she saw parked on the left shoulder, another 100 yards ahead. A different truck. White this time. A Chevy Silverado with a camper shell and a cracked mud flap on the rear passenger side, parked at an angle that wasn't quite right. Not like someone had pulled over to check their phone, but like someone who had been told to wait somewhere specific and was doing exactly that. Leah slowed. Ranger slowed. She scanned the cab, 2 silhouettes. The tree line on the right, nothing moving but wind. The drainage ditch on the left, covered with scrub. The road behind her, the black Dodge still sitting where she'd left it, no one moving toward it. Her hand didn't go to her hip. She wasn't carrying, not visibly. What she was carrying was everything she'd learned about what it meant when vehicles appeared in sequence on roads that no one used. She had worked 2 years in the 7th Special Forces Group's regional support element before her K-9 assignment, running logistics and intelligence for operations in Central and South America. She knew what a relay looked like. 2 vehicles meant a handoff. A handoff meant something was moving, cargo, personnel, or information, and someone had set up this road as a corridor. The first 3 men hadn't been random. The first 3 men had been a test, or a barrier. She thought about the chain in the young one's hand, not a weapon of opportunity. Something you'd grab in a kitchen, a garage, wherever you happened to be when trouble arrived. The chain had been brought. It had been part of an expectation that whatever was on this road would need to be stopped, and that stopping it would require tools. What did this road connect? She pulled out her phone, no signal, which she'd known since mile 2, and stared at the GPS map that was still loaded from the last connection. The road came out of Harlan County proper, wound through 3 miles of Forest Service land, and connected on the far end to a private property boundary she recognized because she'd looked it up 2 weeks ago when she'd first been asked, quietly, informally, to take a few days and see if a certain route was still being used. Not a vacation, not exactly. She looked at the white truck. The white truck's engine was running. Leah Sutton had been out of uniform for 8 months. She had a medical separation. Ranger's shrapnel wound had been more complicated on her end than it looked, involving a concussion and a fractured orbital socket from the same blast, and the Army had decided she needed more time than she was willing to give it. She had disagreed. They had won temporarily, and she had come home to a sister's spare bedroom in Lexington and spent 4 months teaching herself to sleep past 4 a.m. and pretending she didn't miss it. She missed it every day. But this she hadn't missed because she'd never really left it. You didn't leave that part. It left you or it didn't, and so far with her it hadn't. She made a decision. She kept walking. Same pace, same posture. Just a woman and her dog on a back road nobody used. She watched the white truck in her peripheral vision without looking at it directly, which was a skill that sounded small until you understood how much information you could absorb from a thing you were pretending not to see. The passenger window came down. A man leaned out. Early 40s, crew cut gone salt and pepper, a face that had been outdoors long enough to forget what indoors felt like. He held up a hand, not threatening the flat palm gesture of someone who wanted to talk. She stopped. Ranger stopped. "Sutton," the man said. She looked at him directly now. She knew that face. She hadn't seen it in 2 years, but she knew it. Specifically, she knew it at 0:30 outside a building in Bogota that officially didn't exist, under light that was mostly satellite dish glow, and the man had been giving her a sitrep in the same flat, factual voice he was using right now. "Calhoun," she said. "Special Agent Dennis Calhoun, DEA Task Force, technically retired but clearly not retired, opened the Silverado's door and stepped out. He was wearing civilian clothes, flannel shirt, work boots, nothing remarkable, and he had the kind of stillness that told her whoever was in the driver's seat was watching the road behind her. "You want to tell me what happened back there," he said. "3 men tried to interfere with my walk, and they had a change of plans." Calhoun looked at Ranger, who looked at Calhoun with the polite disinterest of someone who had already made his assessment and filed it under non-threat. "We've had eyes on those 3 for 6 weeks, Calhoun said. "They run security for a distribution point about 2 miles up this road. Mostly fentanyl, some precursor chemicals. Every couple months someone drives it out on this route because the Forest Service land doesn't have cameras." "You were watching them." "We were watching the road. You were." He paused. "An unexpected variable. That's a generous way to put it." He almost smiled. "We've got a federal warrant. We were 40 minutes from the move. But those 3 making contact with you." He looked back at the Dodge, still sitting where she'd left it. "We're going to have to fold this in now. It changes the timeline." She understood what he was saying. 3 men who were supposed to be inconspicuous had instead confronted a civilian, been physically neutralized, and were currently sitting in the road processing what had happened to them. The distribution point would have check-in protocols. When those 3 didn't report, something upstream would notice. "How far is the distribution point?" she asked. "A 1.75 miles, old logging operation. 3 structures, a main barn and 2 outbuildings. We've got 6 assets converging from the north, but I need someone to cover the south exit in the next 22 minutes because my 6th asset just told me his vehicle is immobilized and I'm down a position." She looked at him. He looked at her. Ranger looked at the road ahead with the focused attention of an animal that understood tone if not words, and whose understanding of tone told him something was about to begin. "I'm not active duty," Leah said. "No," Calhoun agreed. "I don't have a weapon." He opened the back door of the Silverado, and there was a bag on the seat. He didn't reach for it. He just left it visible. Leah looked at the bag. She looked at the road. She thought about Ranger's scar, about the morning breaths, about 8 months in a spare bedroom, becoming someone she didn't recognize. She thought about what she was actually good at, and whether she was going to let that go to waste on a back road in Harlan County, because it wasn't technically her job today. 22 minutes, she said. 20. Ah. Then stop talking. She took the bag from the back seat. It took her 45 seconds to be ready in the way she needed to be ready, which was less about equipment and more about a gear shift inside herself that she'd learned to do quickly and without ceremony. You were one thing, and then you were another thing, and the transition was a decision, not a process. Ranger watched her make it. He'd seen her make it before. His posture changed at the same time hers did. Not trained response, not command, just something that moved between them like a current. His head came up, his ears forward, his amber eyes steady on the road ahead. She looked at Calhoun. "Channel," he told her. She set the earpiece. "If there's a south exit," she said, "there'll be a vehicle. There is. A van, white, older, no plates. If it moves before we're in position, it cannot reach the county road." "Understood." She paused. "What's in the van?" Calhoun's expression didn't change, but something moved behind his eyes. "That's what we need to find out." She filed that. She started walking. The logging operation appeared through the tree line as a cluster of gray-brown shapes. Weathered structures that had been abandoned long enough to look natural in the landscape, if you weren't looking for the details that didn't fit. A generator cable running under the barn door, tire tracks too recent for the season, a dog kennel, empty, next to the smaller outbuilding, which told her there had been a dog here and now wasn't, which meant someone had been careful, which meant someone had been here a while and thought about things. She found her position at the south end of the property before the first sounds came from the north. A tree line gave her cover and sight line both. She crouched, Ranger beside her, and she pressed 2 fingers briefly to the side of his neck. Not a command, just contact, and he leaned into it for exactly 1 second and then straightened again. The van was where Calhoun had said, parked behind the smaller outbuilding, nose pointed south. It was running. Someone already knew. "Calhoun," she said quietly into the earpiece, "the van is warm. You have a runner." A half-second of static. Then, "Copy. We are 90 seconds out. Can you hold?" She looked at the van. She looked at the narrow dirt track that ran from the outbuilding south through a gap in the tree line, the route the van would take. She calculated angles, distances, options. "I can hold," she said. The driver came out of the outbuilding at a run. A man in his 50s, heavy-set, wearing a canvas jacket and moving with the focused urgency of someone who had rehearsed this exit in his head many times, and was finally doing it. He yanked the van's driver's door open and threw himself inside. Leah stepped out of the tree line. Not toward the van. She stepped to the center of the dirt track, between the van and the gap in the trees, and she stood there with Ranger beside her, and she looked at the windshield, and she waited. The van didn't move. She could see the driver through the glass, his face working through something, some calculation, some assessment of what he was looking at. A woman on a dirt road, a dog beside her. He made the decision she expected him to make, because men like him always made it. He put the van in drive. Ranger sat. He didn't sprint, didn't crouch, didn't telegraph anything. He sat, and he looked at the van with those amber eyes, and something in the absolute stillness of an animal that was not afraid. That had never, in 4 years and 2 deployments and 1 piece of shrapnel, learned what it felt like to run, communicated something to the driver that his foot registered before his brain did. The van stopped, 15 feet from her. The engine idled. From the north end of the property came the controlled sounds of a professional entry, not loud, not cinematic, just purposeful and efficient, the sounds of people who knew exactly what they were doing and had done it many times. Leah kept her eyes on the windshield. "Step out of the vehicle," she said. Flat, clear, the same voice she'd used on the road 40 minutes and a different lifetime ago. The driver's hands appeared above the dashboard. He stepped out. She had him face down on the dirt track, with his hands secured, zip ties from the bag, by the time Calhoun's team came around the south side of the outbuilding. A man she didn't recognize in full tactical kit stopped when he saw her and looked at the driver on the ground, and then at her, and then at Ranger, who was sitting 4 feet away, wearing the patient expression of someone who had never doubted how this was going to go. The agent looked at Calhoun, who had appeared at his shoulder. "Is that?" "Yes," Calhoun said. "And the dog?" "Also yes." Inside the van, under a false floor that someone had built carefully and filled less carefully, they found 42 kilos of fentanyl, $11,000 in mixed bills, and a hard drive that Calhoun's expression told her was worth considerably more than either of those things. She didn't ask about the hard drive, not her lane. What she did ask, 2 hours later, sitting on the tailgate of the Silverado, while a federal crime scene team worked the barn, and Ranger slept across her feet with the boneless ease of an animal that had earned its rest. What she asked was whether Calhoun had known she'd be on that road today. He looked at the tree line for a while before he answered. "I knew you came back," he said. "I knew you walked that road. That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. She let it sit. The sun was dropping behind the western ridge, and the hills were going from amber to something darker, and it was the kind of quiet that didn't ask anything of you, which was the only kind she'd ever truly trusted. "The 3 from the road," she said. "What happens to them?" "They'll cooperate. Men like that always cooperate when they understand the alternative. And the hard drive. That's above both our pay grades." She nodded. She looked down at Ranger, who had shifted in his sleep, and she put her hand on his back, and she felt him breathe. slow, steady, the deep breathing of a dog who trusted where he was. And she thought about what it meant to be good at something that the world sometimes needed and sometimes tried to pretend it didn't. She thought about the driver's face when Ranger sat in the road and looked at him. The way a man who had made a decision could unmake it when the thing in front of him was absolutely, entirely unafraid. She thought Ranger had earned that reputation, had paid for it in blood and shrapnel, and the way he sometimes took that one careful breath on cold mornings. She thought she had too. Calhoun's phone buzzed. He looked at it, looked at her, looked at the barn where his team was working. "There's going to be paperwork," he said. "Significant paperwork. There always is. And a conversation with people above. Me, I assumed." He paused. He had the expression of a man choosing his words with the particular care of someone who had been burned by imprecision before. "There's a position," he said. "Technically a consulting role. Canine qualified personnel, special operations background available for." "Send me the paperwork," she said. He nodded once. He walked back toward the barn. Leah sat on the tailgate and watched the sky go dark above the Kentucky hills and listened to Ranger breathe. And she thought that 8 months was a long time to be between things you were built for. And she thought that this road, this afternoon, this dirt track, and that driver's hands above the dashboard felt less like a mission and more like an answer to a question she'd been asking for a long time, without quite knowing how to put it into words. She wasn't lost. She'd just been between assignments. Ranger lifted his head in the dark and looked at her, the amber eyes catching the last light off the barn's security lamp, and she scratched behind his ear once, the spot that made his whole face go soft, and he held her eyes for a moment with the steady, uncomplicated gaze of an animal who had never once doubted her and was simply waiting to see what came next. She could work with that, she always had.